Call to order. If you could do a roll call, please.
Present on the phone.
Patrick Updike.
Present on the phone.
Jeff Sunholm.
Present.
Marty Smith. Tom Lampy.
Present.
John Benson. Bob Van Wolfrat. Denise Pavlik.
Present on the phone.
Andy Buffington.
Present.
Ellen Hagan. Deb Crable.
Present.
Dave Ness.
Here.
Jason Leonard.
Here.
Rob Rotter.
Present.
Mike Casper. Carol Lund Smith.
Present on the phone.
Larry Smith.
Present on the phone.
Linda Frederickson.
Present on the phone.
Kelly Grosskirth. We got a quorum.
Thank you, sir. Introduction of board members. For those on the phone, please, starting with Denise.
Denise Pavlik, Scott Emergency Communication Center, representing communication centers.
Patrick Updike, Iowa Department of Corrections.
Jeff Swearingen, Iowa Department of Natural Resources.
Carol Lund Smith, Iowa Law Enforcement Academy.
Larry Smith, Kiki County Emergency Management.
Brian Dreiling, representing Bob Van Wolfrat, State Chief Information Officer.
Okay, is that it? Starting at the end, Sheriff?
Linda Frederickson, Medic EMS, Davenport, Iowa, representing the Iowa EMS Association.
Rob Rotter, Iowa County Sheriff, representing Iowa Sheriffs.
Jeff Sunholm, Department of Transportation.
Kelly Grosskirth, member at large.
John Benson, Iowa Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management.
Chris Myers, I'm the SWIC.
Tom Lampy, DPS.
Jason Leonard, Waverly Police Department, representing Municipal Police.
Deb Crable, representing the professional fire chiefs and the professional firefighters.
Andy Buffington with Winnebago and Hancock County Emergency Management Communications, representing communication centers.
Dave Ness, Des Moines Police.
Okay, welcome everybody to the board meeting and then to the great day of December 14th. I've got some stuff to get through today, a couple things on new business, try to get through as quickly as possible, but I do need the approval of today's agenda. If I could get a motion for that, please.
Andy Buffington, so move.
Andy, have a second?
Second.
Jeff Sunholm, second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Need the approval by a motion for the meeting minutes from November 9th, 2017. Anybody? Dave Ness, do I have a second?
Second.
Jason Leonard, second. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. SWIC report.
Okay, it's been a busy month. We'll start off by mentioning some lighter material. The SafeCom survey is still available for the taking. If you haven't done so yet, I would highly recommend taking that SafeCom communication survey. It's available through February 23rd, and it's really a chance for Iowa to make their voices heard about the state of emergency communications across the country. I think this will be the basis for a lot of things down the road. So the more fingerprints of ours we can get on that survey and that data set, the better. One other business note, our end of the year report is due to the legislature at the conclusion of this month. I'm actively working on that draft in coordination with previous SWIC Allen to make sure that we have everything covered. We'll probably have to have a conference call to approve that this month, but that is also in the progress. One other thing also, as far as upkeep goes, I will be reaching out to approved users of Isicsb within the next couple of weeks to discuss things like radio programming, talk groups, and such. And this will help ensure that they have the needed interop talk groups programmed into their devices so that when this network is live in the next few months, everybody will be able to talk to each other as intended. My outreach to local counties and stakeholders continues. I've been able to gather a lot of information and learn quite a bit about how things are done in each and every county, and so far they've all been different. I've had a chance to also go to a few local county meetings, 911 meetings and such, and so far I've been to 17 counties, and several of them I've been to multiple times. It's going to be kind of a lull for the next couple of weeks as expected with the holidays, but I expect this to pick back up in January. This past week, I voted on 2 TIA and TR8 standards. One's a little bit more germane as it relates to a new spreadsheet to measure signal loss within an LMR system. The one that's probably of more interest to this board would be the accessory generated emergency inside of the control channel. Basically, what the premise of this new standard is to facilitate a way so that if a weapon is drawn or something impacts an officer's vest, it automatically puts the subscriber unit in emergency mode and sends that out via the control channel to dispatch, so that can get there a little bit sooner with very little user intervention. This will have other applications as well. There's still several other data slots they haven't filled yet, and I would imagine that the next couple are going to be related to fire. So that is hopefully going to be incorporated once it's approved by TIA within the next year or so into products. So keep your eyes open for that. On to encryption, the interoperable talk groups. So we've had our 4th meeting regarding those encrypted interoperable talk groups. Again, I want to thank all of our members for their participation and contributions and dedication to helping get this sorted out. I think so far everybody's gained a new appreciation of the different aspects of something like encryption on a network the size of Isicsb and how vexing it actually can be. Even from the vendor standpoint, I know I spoke to a few of them, and we are encountering some unique challenges in Iowa that they may not have previously considered, so we are breaking new ground. The most recent meeting we had was with members of TR8.3. This is the encryption subs committee that sets standards for encrypted communications. We had represented parties from E.F. Johnson, FBI, FPIC, Harris, Motorola, and the Office of Emergency Communications, in addition to our normal contingent of Iowa stakeholders. We also had an interested representative from Missouri call in to see how we are approaching this, because they're looking at the same problems we are. The meeting was very productive in discussing the current standards for P25 encryption, along with providing an opportunity to see where those standards are going in the future and then how things are incorporated into end products. We're also going to, we got to ask some very technical questions, and for the most part, we got straight answers on almost everything, which was excellent. I'm very happy to report that a lot of the technical problems associated with single key radios have been solved at the vendor level at the very least. So that's good. There's no standards for how to solve those problems yet, but at least the vendors are being proactive in addressing the issues and communications between single key and multi-key subscribers. During the proceedings also, we were able to come to a conclusion that can be translated into a technical recommendation. That technical recommendation is not ready for board reviewing yet, but it's in draft status. But it is going to revolve around being flexible, but then also saying if you want to interoperate in an encrypted environment on Isicsb, multi-key radios are probably going to be the best option, because it still gives local counties the flexibility and local dispatch centers the flexibility to have their own key material for their own ops to stay separate from the statewide system. It gives a lot of flexibility with regards to key management, even though it does introduce some new problems. It gives more options for key management in general, and a full list of those things will be in the technical recommendation that should be ready next month. The timeline for vetting this is unchanged. I expect something to come to conclusion somewhere within the next year or two, and then some testing phases, and then it should be ready to roll out. RIC projects are underway. So far, all the RICs have met on interstate interoperability and also prisoner transports. Although all those discussions were very productive, and we basically were able to outline the current communications landscape across the state and with some of our neighbors, and it's very fragmented. So I think the work we're doing right now is very well served as well. The transports also branched out into not only just prisoners, but also medical and mental health. That's something that perhaps is somewhat overlooked at times when we're looking at it from the 30,000-foot level, but having these local level meetings really helped bring that to light so that we can come up with a better set of policies or procedures or what have you in the end. The notes from those meetings have been assembled and distributed to the stakeholders. Our next set of meetings are going to be slated for January, and they'll focus on applying that knowledge that we now have on paper. One final note that I want to talk about today is something that came up last meeting, and that is an approved subscriber list. We did some homework on this over the last month, and more or less there was some concern that there was a list on the Isicsb website that is no longer present. And the reason for that is that existing list was something that SAFECOM published in 2016. However, not all the units on that list went through recertification in 2016. Some of those initial certifications date all the way back to 2010, so they may be outdated, and they only covered phase 1 devices. ISICS is a phase 2 network, and there's no guarantee that something that works in phase 1 is going to work in phase 2. We did coordinate with some of the people on the CAP testing group, and unfortunately they said that they're still in the process of credentialing labs to actually do the work. From there, they have to acquire the equipment needed to do the testing, and they have a ways to go yet, more or less. No phase 2 documentation from the CAP program is expected until August of 2018 at the earliest, but that may be delayed slightly too if they are still credentialing some labs. So there's some caveats with that. I want to stress that ISICS is an interoperable system, so expecting everyone to have the same subscriber unit is unreasonable. We're going to have different vendors tied into the system. We're going to have different capacities to communicate that are going to be present on the system, so it's good to make sure that this is as open and as agnostic as it can possibly be. And I think one of the ways we can make sure that our list is not restrictive, but yet well laid out, is by looking back at what we initially wanted with the system. So we wanted interoperability. We wanted everybody to talk to each other. So I think what we could do is start with the RFP to get a list of desired features. And then from there, we can compare those features with documentation Motorola has provided as they're building the system out. And then taking that information and figuring out what we consider to be our core tenets of interoperability on ISICS. Is it something where we want it to consist mainly of push to talk, let up to listen? Do we want the encryption to work a certain way? And roaming especially. We don't necessarily want units that don't roam properly on the Isicsb platform, especially if they're having to migrate from, say, another manufacturer's system onto Isicsb and vice versa. We want to make sure that's as seamless as possible. So the long and short of it is that we're going to need some more input from the technology committee on this to get an idea of how things have changed. And then eventually we're going to have to go out and do our own fleet testing. And I've had some discussions with vendors about getting written statements from them saying that their stuff will work on ISICS. And then I'm also starting to look at areas of the state where we could start testing these subscriber units to make sure that they do exactly what they say. So it's going to be a two-tiered approach. I think we can have something laid out in the next few months as far as how we want this to look. And then once these networks come online, we can actually start doing some field work. So we have a path, we have a plan. It's just going to take a little bit of time, but I think we'll have things out relatively soon. As far as the vendors that I've reached out to so far, I've reached out to the big three: EF Johnson, Harris, and Motorola. So we should have a nice comprehensive list of subscriber units by the time all is said and done. So with that being said, I'll yield back to you, Chair Lampy, and take any questions.
Just to recap, the reason the list was taken off the website because of it was inaccurate and outdated.
Yes.
Okay. All right. 911 council report. Blake, you're up. Morning.
Council approved 10 GIS grants for a total of the same 5 PSAPs that I presented last month. remain for text 911 that have not made that technological conversion yet. Should have the number down to 4 by next month, and continuing to work with the remaining PSAPs and the vendors to get those taken care of. The council, I'm sorry, I missed this one. The council also did approve $23,000 for various training throughout the state. Gold line training to be held in Buena Vista County, funds for the APCO training conference, and also ethics and legal training, as well as officer down training for telecommunicators in Cerro Gordo County. So those will be upcoming. And then finally, we are going to be scheduling an EMD webinar. That was part of the offering of the shared services component through Zetron. We'll be offering that early in the next year. If you remember the last couple council meetings, we had a presentation from the ICN on the wireline merging, and we had a presentation from Zetron on mostly focusing on the call handling aspect of our proposed legislation. So EMD is another big chunk that will be offered, and that's emergency medical dispatch, kind of doing the telecommunicator triage, if you will, with the caller. So there's been a lot of questions asked around that. So getting in front of that and presenting it, probably webinar style, to PSAPs, anyone that wants to participate. I'm sure we'll record that and also keep that on our website. Any other questions?
Blake, the first training that you said that you had approved, it said it was gold line?
Gold line training.
What is that?
Joe, did you want to mention anything about it?
I can mention it. It's a company I started myself. I used to teach nationally for a company out of California. And I went and got a teaching certification in Florida, and I also got an FBI teacher certification through the state of Iowa. So I meet all the requirements. And it's a class that brings leadership development, personal development, and it mixes in 911 training to the dispatchers to teach them how to be better at their job and set them up for career success. The 911 profession around the world, retention is very, go ahead.
You have a microphone. I can hear you fine, but just for everybody else.
In the 911 profession, turnover is pretty high and retention's pretty low. And so the goal was to make it so that dispatchers in the state of Iowa take the job and stay in the job. And blending my experience with the teaching certifications to bring that to people. It's been taught in Johnson County on 2 different occasions, same day, but 2 different occasions. And the review was that overwhelmingly that it was much needed for all dispatchers, and a lot of the reviews said that every dispatcher should hear this class.
When will that be?
I don't remember
The
when
date
Buena
of it
Vista
is March 5th, I believe, but I'm not 100% positive on that. I
Will it
got
be
5
posted
of
on
them
your
scheduled.
website?
And then just to remind everyone, a couple years ago, legislation was changed, kind of authorizing $100,000 for 3 different things: council travel, 911 training, and public education. So we expect to see a few more trainings still approved yet this year, but that's coming out of 911 surcharge and available for really any over-the-top type of telecommunicator class. The council approved a policy last year that kind of put some rules around it, but we're seeing a lot more local service boards presenting training opportunities.
How do you apply to request funds for training?
And just get it on the agenda for a council meeting. Probably best if somebody would be available to present at the council meeting. But it's basically kind of a core syllabus, what the intended purpose is, and get it on the agenda for approval. Last year, ILEA had a couple courses that we helped pay for as well.
Is that something that you'd be able to do regionally?
Absolutely. The intent is kind of, it needs to be open to everyone, not just, your PSAP is going to benefit for it. So that was one of the criteria, that it needed to have open enrollment.
Right.
And
No, I just see a great
anyway.
benefit in that. and I'm glad that you explained it to me. Thank you, sir. I mean, it's just, telecommunicators, I think sometimes get forgotten in our world, and the more training that they have, the better.
And that is the focus as well.
Absolutely. So, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
User Group Committee, Chair Buffington.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. User Group Committee met on November 16th via conference call. We had Rick reports that the SWIC touched on. We considered 2 applications, one for Carlisle Fire, one for the Lynn County Sheriff's Office, that will be under new business today on our agenda. One of the things we also discussed was the need or actually desire for metro interop talk groups rather than in addition to the regional. So there was a lot of discussion about do we make them population and geographic, some sort of baseline, because I think that that's going to come up more and more often for some of those different metropolitan areas in the state of Iowa, that they're going to request things like that. We talked about, who would have access to those. So there's varying and widely dispersed opinions on everything. So we're going to continue to work on that and then try to identify those parameters. And with that, that's my report. If there's any questions.
Okay, thank you. Finance Committee, Chair Grosskreutz.
The Finance Committee met last Tuesday on the phone, and we reviewed our financials. The annual appropriation ending fund balance or cash balance is $254,071.46. And the grant ending cash balance is $30,200.25. There were no disbursements that gave us any questions. And we have found out for the annual appropriation request that we're going to need to request the same amount that we received last year minus the changes that were made by legislation. So we will be requesting $115,661. And we had no other items to discuss.
Okay. I do have one thing. I don't know if you talked about it on your Finance Committee about the Isicsb 2.0.
You,
Would you like me to?
yeah, go ahead. You applied for the
Yes.
second phase monies, I believe.
Yes, and I asked Ethan to post that application on the website, so it's on there now, so you can see it. So the total, we're allowed 700,000 for the 2-year, which starts March 1st of 18 through 2020 March. Each state has a limit. Bigger states have more money. So it's a total of 700,000 you're eligible for. When we went through it, basically we're maintaining what we have with our salaries and just to keep us functioning with FirstNet and outreach, office supplies, et cetera. One thing, it was a 20% match. So we do have match money, hard match money left. We will have left from Isicsb 1.0. So we're going to roll that into applying that to the 20% for the next one. So the Isicsb 1.0 will be closing out here soon. I did sign an extension because they ended in February, so to coincide with the start of the Isicsb 2.0, to match up with the last one expiring, they had to do an extension, so I had to sign that to get it to March 1st instead of February 1st. So, but as of March 1st, we expect to continue as we operate. You shouldn't notice any difference. We should have plenty of funding for that 2 years. Okay. All right, governance.
All right, during our last conference call, we had a few items that we've been working on. The first one is the amendment to the memorandum of agreement, which we will take up under new business. Quite simply, it was a change based on legislation that was undertaken last legislative session, which made emergency management a public safety agency, and simply moved the emergency management agency line item out of public service and moved it into public safety. So I will be making a motion on that under new business. The second item that we did work on and are continuing to work on is the grant application process. If the board were to ever be in a situation where they had funds to make available to local agencies for whatever projects they had out there, we've started kind of working through what that process would look like, what the application process would look like. Had some good discussion, had some good feedback, so we'll keep on it. I would anticipate we'll probably bring it in front of the board maybe February, most likely March meeting for final consideration. This is the limit of my report.
How did we handle it when we did the PSIC grants? Do you have some type of flow there that you
That
can research?
that was completely defined by the federal grant process. Okay. It was not a board process. The federal grant guidance said you will do it this way, and we did it that way.
Okay.
So we're kind of stealing a little bit from that, also from some other grant sources, and trying to make it so money can get out. It's understandable what the money is to be used for, and then you have reporting, clear reporting back on what the grant was used for. So it's not just the money goes shooting out the door, and then we don't know if it got spent or not. So there's appropriate reporting back on it as well.
Okay. Okay, we'll move on to operations.
Thank you, Chair Lampy.
Hey, you can have mine.
Thank
Oh, wait.
you. It's just me.
You must have a magnetic field around you or something.
Electrical. Yep. I won't touch anything. Okay. The Ops Committee monthly meeting is usually the third Wednesday of the month, and on November 15th, we didn't have a quorum, so we had to reschedule to November 29th. The phone conference meeting was to discuss the Ops Committee's role in getting the system up and running by July 2018 and going live. Presently, the committee is sending out surveys to all the PSAPs in the state to find out each PSAP status on connectability to the state system. We found some difficulty in reaching some of those PSAPs, so we're trying to verify some of those contacts with that. I'll probably be contacting Blake, but we were also going to reach out to the outreach committee and finding out there was a few that we could not contact. Also, Chair Lampy and Swick Myers reached out to the Ops Committee to establish a letter to the PSAPs informing them of the status of the ops details and other aspects of the Isicsb and give a timeline for its establishment to those PSAPs as it relates within the state. I don't know if Chair Lampy or Swick Myers would have any comments or want to add to that.
The purpose of the letter, we felt, was to give them plenty of time for updating on the system, that it's coming, prepare your PSAPs for the regional talk group access, and however you choose to do that with some board assistance if it's available. So the important thing is to just at least get the PSAPs at a level 1 so you can access your regional talk groups and the statewide talk groups. So announce it now. Hey, this is coming as a reminder. You have till almost August, the fall, to come up with a solution for your PSAP to access those talk groups. There's lots of ways to do that. You can go very expensive or you can go bare bones. So we can assist you with that with the technology committee through your vendor or Motorola or whatever you want to do to access those. Because everything, the interoperability, if you have it in the PSAP level, you can do a lot with that in regards to just a level 1 user.
Thank you. That's really all I have. And our next Ops Committee meeting is Wednesday, December 21st at 1:30.
Anticipate that maybe in January board meeting for approval to send out?
Yes.
Okay. Outreach, I don't think Helen is here or on the phone. Is she on the phone? Ellen. Hagan. Sean, you can take care of that? Okay.
For outreach, we've been working on. Obviously, we had the November 30th conference. The reason why that hasn't been posted yet is due to a couple people were sick. And I'm trying to edit out the coughing and the drinking of the water so that you don't have to listen to that. That's the honest reason why it hasn't been posted yet. There was just a lot of coughing, and I figured if you want to watch the video, we're going to do our best to clean up some of that so that you don't have to watch that part or actually listen to it. So that hopefully will be out in the next week. It'll be posted on our YouTube channel and links will be in our newsletter. We've been doing updates to the newsletter to make sure, one, the SafeCom survey is included and that we have a couple of additional items acknowledging people who have joined the RICs acknowledging people who have been approved on the Isicsb platform and talking about the accomplishments with AT&T and FirstNet with new contracts being signed. We've been specifically working with the RICs to say, hey, when we go out and do these new outreach demo things like we did here in Region 1, how can we get you more interactive? How can we make sure that we're using use case scenarios that apply to you? We sent out an initial email, and we've been working with a couple of the RIC chairs, and the suggestions have been excellent. But I need more. I need more from each region to say, hey, look, here are specific examples in our PSAP or with our public safety agencies in which interoperability or how we would use these talk groups. We're trying to not take any assumptions. So when we go out and do these, we don't want to assume that you know what talk groups are. We don't want to assume that you know how to program radios. We don't want to make any assumptions to a lot of those types of things that, oh, you know what the future of LEA is, you know what's going on with the radio system. We want to take all assumptions off the board and first of all, educate you with some vocabulary if you don't know what those things are. And then we want to talk to you about what you currently have and then how that will work with the new Isicsb platform. So we're really trying to make sure we continue with the hands-on approach. We make sure we get feedback from you and your region and you tell us, hey, look, here's what's going on. Here are specific use cases in which we could have used interoperability. How would we do a talk group in that scenario? How would we use FirstNet in this scenario? How would we do these things? So we're really trying to make sure that this isn't something that we don't know how to apply it. Because the worst part about technology is if you don't have application of it, it just becomes a useless thing that you have. So we're trying to really make sure that everybody understands each of these primary components of both systems. So when we do the road show, Swick Myers will be out there, and then we'll have the radio technicians out there, possibly Scott or Dave, and then possibly Rhonda, and then we're gonna highly integrate and we're gonna highly ask that we get the RIC chairs or vice chairs or someone from that region to come in and specifically talk about interoperability. We got excellent feedback from the guys in RIC 2. They sent us a whole list of ideas. They were very specific. They provided very specific examples of this is what we'll bring. We're going to bring 5 trucks, 1 station radio, 22 handhelds, and this is the scenario. These are what our radios look like now. How does this work? So again, we're trying to make sure you understand, you see how it works. We're not talking above anybody's head. We just make sure that it's easy to understand. Excuse me. Questions?
When do you anticipate the next one?
The next one. So what we're working on right now is January, end of January. So it'll be the end of month, every month beginning in January. As long as we can get the RIC chair and vice chairs available, make sure that they're available as well as the vendors, because here again, we're coordinating with FirstNet, AT&T, and Motorola to make sure we can give updates on the Isicsb platform. So we're juggling a lot of characters in these presentations so that you get it directly from the most knowledgeable people that we have available. So if there's any questions that I can't answer or one of our other staff can't answer, that we'll have one of the vendors there that can say, hey, look, that works, or this doesn't work, or I'll get you in touch with an engineer.
Okay.
And it's in the newsletter as well. It says to be determined or end of month, but it will be the end of month, and it'll show you the cities and which region they're in, but that will be in this month's newsletter that will be sent out next week.
Approximately how many did we have at the last one?
We had approximately 70 registrants, and I believe about 50 in person. How many on the internet or streaming or conference? Unfortunately, we can't really monitor that, but I do know that we had at a minimum 10 requests for the videos so far, and I've had to tell people I'll get them posted as quickly as possible. It's just I didn't want you to have to listen to the things, those types of things, because it can be very distracting and it takes away from the message.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
thank you. Moving on to training. Chair Pavlik, are you on the phone by chance?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so the training committee met. We discussed a lot of upcoming trainings. The first training that we had discussed was the one that took place, the incident tactical dispatcher class took place in November. We actually had an extremely good turnout, and the class was very valuable. A lot of good feedback from the class, so that was pretty awesome. We're looking to hopefully do a couple more classes across the state. That one was actually in Des Moines, so maybe we can get the east and the west sides of the state as well eventually. We looked at Gateway Train the Trainer class, which is coming up in January. It will be the 21st through the 25th. Actually, what they're going to do is take 3 trainers within our state. They are going to become certified, so they are going to get the training, and then they are going to move through the state. They're going to hold one class on the west side. They're going to start on the west side of the state and move east. So they'll do west, central, and east at 3 different locations. They will then teach the class with their certification. So that takes place in January. We are going to ask, and I sent a request to the Finance Committee if they could take a look and see if the funds would be available to pay for the trainers. I know they don't meet till the beginning of the month, and then we could talk about it being an agenda item on next month's to get approval to pay for their travel costs. So that will be on next month's agenda. The other thing we did was talk about a state-sponsored COMT class, which will be hosted February 5th through the 9th. It will be at Fort Dodge, and it will probably be the same as we had this year, where half of the seats will be for Fort Dodge attendees, and then the other ones will be for outside, anyone within the state. We're still kind of shoring up some things with that class, so as more information becomes available, we'll make sure to pass that out. We have a few other classes in mind, and we did supply that to the OEC. Right now, I think we're on hold with a few things, waiting for the federal budget, but the classes that I mentioned have already been approved, so we don't have to worry about that. The other thing that we were looking at is the best practices guide for telecommunicators. And as a committee, we were going through and making comments and notations and trying to clean up that document that was provided to me. I've passed on to them. They've provided some feedback, and then we will get that back to you, Chair, and then it can go to the Operations Committee or the Governance Committee and the other committees that need to see it and for final approval eventually. I think right now that's it. That's all I have.
For those on the phone, if you could please mute your line. We're hearing a lot of chatter in the background. I'm sure you don't want us to hear that. So if you could please mute your line until you're ready to speak, that'd be great. Chair Updike, are you on the phone?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you're up on technology, please.
The Technology Committee met once due to the fact that one of the scheduled calls landed on Thanksgiving. So if you remember from last month, we were discussing the programming guide, and we also had the Attorney General's office come visit the meeting and kind of give us some guidance on how to move forward. And so you should have some documentation in front of you that shows a draft policy. I started working on this draft policy as it relates to the programming guide, which is another document that you should have in front of you. You've seen it multiple times. And went ahead and put it together, had the Technology Committee look at it. I also sent it to the Attorney General's office to get their input. You should have a document that has draft written across it with some red markups on it. One of the things that seemed to be of importance to some of the members was that it recited some of the Iowa code. That doesn't appear in this document. I'm thinking that it probably will ultimately. I'm still waiting for input from the Attorney General's office to see if that's how we should go, reference Iowa code within this document because it wasn't put in there. The programming guide itself kind of got into a dilemma here because you have to have a policy that recognizes the fact that your programming guide is going to be kept confidential. Well, if we haven't adopted the programming guide, why are we drafting a policy? And so I'm getting all of that worked out because within that programming guide, we want to make sure that there's appropriate wording in there that recognizes Iowa code and any other federal standards or guidelines that may be important to that programming guide. So I'm hoping that within the next month here we can get this wrapped up, put it in front of the board, have it go out for 30-day comment on both the programming guide possibly and the draft, and then get it adopted and put in place. So they're obviously tied to one another. And so once I get more information from the AG's office, then hopefully we can move forward on that. The next item that you should be looking at is the air-to-ground channel plan. One of the concerns that came up with this issue was, do we need to license these channels or not? Well, we went ahead and I outlined all of the channels for air-to-ground because at least we want to try to come up with a plan for the use of these channels. If you look at it, it's laid out by region. It doesn't deviate from the NIFOG handbook. It just lays them all out in the same way that it is in the NIFOG. The only thing is we designated the repeater channels and direct channels to regions of the state. So if you're looking at that document, it just goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those channels, as a part of this overall plan or idea, is to get those regions to adopt those. I shouldn't say adopt. You would use those air-to-ground channels based on the region that you reside in the state. We still had 4 channels, 4 frequencies left over. Through some of the discussions with some of the technology members, we decided that we would come up with a set of frequencies that could be used for patching purposes on air-to-ground. That's why it's labeled SWAG. It just means statewide air-to-ground. This plan would allow inbound air mobiles to potentially patch the conventional side into the Isicsb system where line-of-sight issues become a problem for landing or approaching into certain areas. And then the last set of frequencies there is the SWLZ, which we did. This is just following the NIFOG handbook. That particular channel, 7AG88D, is a direct channel that they recommend for landing zone. And so we decided to make this a part of the plan to be an inbound air mobile landing zone channel so that wherever you are in the state, when you're coming into an event location, the aircraft people would switch to that. You'd always know where you're going to be at when you come into a site. Below all of that is some of the wording that we are working on. It probably looks a little bit messy there, but we're trying to get some of the wording developed that outlines the overall plan for air-to-ground channels. And so you'll probably be seeing more of that wording being added to this document. Some of the issues that we've run into is we can't answer whether we need to license them or not. One of our members reached out and to the FCC. We did find out that you are going to have to license these channels. The thing about it is you can license it as a state and then let public safety within the state of Iowa operate under it. That kind of presents some problems because now you probably should be developing wording within that licensing that kind of outlines how people are going to use it and that, we're the responsible party for that. That doesn't exclude agencies within the state, you know, like a sheriff's department. They can license those channels too if they want to. So I think the overall goal here ultimately is to go ahead and get them licensed, but I'm not going to move forward on that until I find out what it's going to cost to do that, because then I would come back and present that information to the board so that we can hopefully get approval to license those channels for the state of Iowa. And then finally, one of our members is going to reach out to people like the Civil Air Patrol to get some of their input on how else we can use these channels. But this is kind of a beginning plan for how to implement air-to-ground channels within the overall design. And finally, we're still working on the some of the subscriber unit requirements. We just haven't been able to get to it because we've been buried in some of these other subjects. And that's all I have for this month.
Patrick, are you going to develop an Isicsb policy on how to use these channels and what the purpose of them are for, and then attach this document for reference? Is that your end game?
I think ultimately we would have to. You know, they would all have to be, it would have to be planned out that says, here's how you're going to use these channels.
That would be my suggestion, that we put it in with our policies and protocols that we're working with now as one of those. So when you're ready, just let us know and we'll get it to that working group.
Okay.
Okay. Moving on, other reports. Is there anything amongst board members you'd like to share? Open it up. Anyone? Chris?
Yeah, I have something, Chair Lampy. Denise, if you're still with us, I would like to make mention that you have graciously agreed to be Rick's sixth chair. I want to thank you for doing that, and I'm looking forward to everything that we're going to be able to do within Rick's six and getting things rolling in that part of the state. So thank you, Denise.
You're welcome.
Nice. Okay. We're on to the Motorola project manager. Melvin, if you could update us, please. Is it done yet? I guess so.
All right, hopefully you guys can see this. All right, well, good morning, members of the board. Here we are at the end of the year. This has been a really exciting year. Before I get into this, I wanted to relay a couple of things. I think some things that I've experienced that I think kind of apply to some of the stuff that we're doing here. Obviously, here we are, the end of 2017. It feels like we started this process just a couple of months ago, because it's been very compressed, a lot of work. Yesterday, I was coming out of a meeting, and I went out for lunch, and on my way to a different location to get some more things done, stopped by a burger joint to grab a burger, and something kind of happened that had me thinking overnight that I thought was kind of funny. The teenager that was operating the cash register charged me, and then he turned around and he gave me a senior discount. And I thought, wow, you know, you think about assumptions, right? People making assumptions and whatnot. And I thought to myself, do I really want to stand here and argue with this kid, try to convince him to take my money that I'm not really that old, right? I couldn't get myself to do that because some of these battles are just not worth. So I said, okay, I'll save my 37 cents and go on, right? So I started thinking about that because in the context of this system deployment, you know, we've had all these outreach efforts that we've been doing throughout the year, and it's been challenging, I know, because it was slow at first, and I felt like we were on the same boat trying to convince the kid that we're not really that old, right? And in terms of momentum and keeping things moving, sometimes it's easier just to shrink back and say, I'm not gonna have this argument. And we recently had this outreach effort again. It was actually done here, and I was really pleased and excited to see that the room was full and that there was a lot of attention being paid to the things that we were communicating to the group that was here. And I feel like we're starting to turn the corner on this overall process because now it's real and people are starting to recognize that it's real. And for the longest time, when we got started in this process, nobody would believe that we could build this as fast as we were saying that we were going to build it. And it seemed like no matter where we went, even if they shook their heads and they listened to you, in the back of their minds, they're looking at me like, yeah, you're still that old guy, take the discount, right? So I just wanted to express that I'm really excited. I'm really proud of the outreach committee because they've done a really good job at doing this. And I think as things start to come up, it's going to get more involved and more complicated, but it'll be good because people will see the real thing that's happening. We won't have to convince them because it'll be there, right, for them to see. So I had to call my wife home and let her know. Somebody thought I was old and she kind of laughed at me, so. All right, so as we look at the project, we've seen this map before. This is the current view of where we stand, right? The solid greens, meaning that we've completed the sites. The greens with motion means that we're actively building. The squares with the T's means that towers have been ordered. So there's been some movement on this, and I want to explain some of that. But before I forget, one of the things I want to mention to Swick Meyer, he was talking about the radio list. And one thing that I thought it's important to mention is that your Iowa has sort of jumped over in terms of technology, and it's been a really big jump. And you're kind of at the cutting edge right now, and you will be. And so you're going to be part of a exclusive club, if you will, of folks that have done this at a large scale, like we're doing it here in the state of Iowa. So that's good, and that presents challenges because you look at the issues with the outdated lists. Well, that presents a challenge. It's not unsurmountable, but it's something that could be handled. It just means that we got to reach out to those entities that have done these large-scale integrations and see how they've handled some of these things. There's people out there. We've supported many of them. You know, we have the resources and the experience in dealing with other projects, so I would encourage the board to reach out to anybody from Motorola. We got a whole bunch of folks here in the back. Because some of those insights, you know, it kind of goes back to why reinvent the wheel, right? Some of these things have happened. Some of these things have been considered before, and so accessing our collective insight really can make a difference and save you guys a lot of time. So, all right. As we look at this map, so what's changed? I'm pretty sure you guys have looked at this, you wouldn't be able to tell. So I highlighted them. So all of these circles indicate the sites that we've changed status, all right? So status in many ways, so I figured I wanted to actually even highlight this and show you the different categories. So since last time, right now, these are the sites that have been completed since we spoke at our last board meeting. So we have 7 sites that have completed. We've done the civil work on them. Scattered throughout the state. We have 3 sites in which we've ordered towers. And what does that mean? That means that those sites were stuck in the regulatory process, which we couldn't order towers before. Now we can order towers because that means that we passed the regulatory process, we can get the permits and start building. So the first step in that process is we order the steel. We never order the steel until it's final, the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, because we want to make sure that once we order that, there's no going back. All right, we have 2 sites that have changed to active build. That means that we had ordered the towers before because they had finished the regulatory, and we were waiting for resources to be made available from other sites that were completed to come over and do these. So now these has flipped from being in the regulatory to ordering the towers to now actually doing builds. We still have 5 sites that are the regulatory process, which is actually an improvement. And what I've done is I've highlighted what we're looking at, the targeted dates for the regulatory to finish for these sites. So if you look in, for example, in Region 1, we have 2 sites. The latest one, or the last one, is in Warren County. So we're talking about March for that one. And then we go throughout, and you can see that it's anywhere from December of this year, and the worst case being March of next year. So once we complete the regulatories on those, and it passes, then we go to the next stages, which is we order the towers and we start working on the foundations. After that, we have the 3 sites that I call them my problem sites. And these are IPTV sites that we haven't been able to get started on them. And I'm highlighting them here, and I'm showing that we have no start date because we really cannot touch those sites until we're allowed to touch those sites. So one of the sites, this one that I'm highlighting here in the middle, it's in Region 2. That's a site that we could actually start today if we wanted to, because we've done assessments on the structures, and we know that we don't have to modify the structures to get started. So the tower structure can support the additional load. We'd like to get started, but we can't yet. The other 2, we're still working on structural analysis. We know some modifications are needed. We defined those, but again, we can't start until we have the permissions to go ahead and get started. All right, so here's what I want to do is just show a couple of photos here of the work that we're doing. In this case, we have the Lee site, which I'm highlighting in the blinking red circle. So on the Lee site, as we've been building the site, it's actually built already, but here's an example of the foundations that we were working on. The pillars, these pillars are really, really deep in order to support the towers. We have the pads that are in place already at that particular point in time. And then we start building up the tower on top of those foundations. Again, a lot of work, and it's always the same. Everybody's always surprised because we talk about it forever and then we get it done in 2 weeks. We also have the Jones site as well. Here's an example of the drilling rig that we use to dig for the foundations. And you can see all the rebar that's required to support that. We're talking about foundations that are about 60 feet deep. Here's a broader view so you can appreciate how deep these foundations are. Once we pour them, we put in all the hardware that's needed, and after about a week, there we go. We have a little bit that sticks up on the top. We deliver the towers to the site, and we stack it up in a week. Here's the beginning of that process. For the Webster, in Webster, again, we already had the pads delivered or built at that point, so here we're just dropping off the shelter. We had actually already built the tower. You can see the tower here, here on the side. That's a brand new tower with all of our dishes on it. Here's an example of Carroll. Again, this is a completed site. So you can see how clean it looks. This is what the typical new, what we call greenfield site looks like. Got the brand new shelter, the tower, 1,000-gallon LP tank, generators, and the like. I had to stand back a little bit to be able to capture the entire site, but that's what the brand new site looks like. Again, for Clayton, in this case, this is just an example. You can see this is actually the truck that delivers the tower. It comes in pieces. We have to build it as, put it together in some pieces in chunks and other pieces just get assembled right on the tower itself. So it's complicated. Yeah, a structure like this, I heard something in the background about wind. This week has been terrible for wind, actually. I went and visited some sites, and I couldn't even get out of my car because the wind was pushing the door. So when we have things like this, we experience delays because obviously we can't elevate that thing up when you have 45-mile-per-hour gusts, shooting that thing around, it gets dangerous. Shelby is interesting because here what I want you to see is, you notice that we ordered the tower in Shelby, but we hadn't actually started building. And the reason we hadn't started building is because Shelby is a unique case in which we have to tear down the tower that's there so we can build a brand new one. And it's very tight space. And also the tower is needed to maintain DOT winter operations. So what we did was we took the one of the trailers and we equipped them. And here's an example of that where we added some special hardware in order to mount this VHF antenna to it. And we went ahead and actually set it up in the site. And DOT has moved on to that, to use that so we can start tearing down the tower that's there. All right. We've also taken one of the SCR trailers and made it a P25 standalone site. And here, these are pictures of what we've installed inside the trailer. We've been able to show it a couple of times, and this is great for events or disasters where a trunk site can really support a large number of talk groups for that particular event or scenario. One of the things that we're doing also is that we're doing 360-degree views. We're starting that now, and we're going to even do some more later. And the reason we're doing that is because it's still sometimes really hard to gain the perspective of the site if you're not really there. And so what we're doing is we're taking these snapshots, and I'm going to show you what it looks like, so that in the future, if the state wants to make any changes or they want to understand the impact, they can go back and take a look at this library of pictures. So as my example here is the story site. So now that we have this capability, you can literally just walk around as if you were there and look around at what the story site looks like, right? There's the LP tank, the generators on the other side, there's a shelter, and there's a tower up there. Again, so we're trying to do this with all the sites because, again, this really gives you a perspective that if you're not there, you can really go back and take a look at this stuff and gain a really clear understanding of what that is. And of course, you can zoom in and out. All right, so in summary, build, build, build. That's all we've been doing. And we've been pushing really, really hard all the way to the end of the year. We got folks out there today. They'll be there next week. They'll be there the week of Christmas because we're really committed to making sure that this happens. So we have, last count, my recent count was we had 15 teams right now operating at the same time throughout the state. So the civil site completion certification process is still ongoing as we keep on going visiting these sites to confirm that they really are done. The microwave dish installations are continuing as we go. Only 5 sites that are in a regulatory process. That probably doesn't sound impressive, but that's a huge victory. The fact that we only have 5 sites that are still going through regulatory process, and those are going to be done actually very near future. And once that's done, as you've seen, we'll be able to start building those sites very quickly, which we intend to. We have all the equipment, we have the shelters, the generators, and the only thing that we have to order is the towers. But while the towers are being built and shipped, we'll be putting in the foundations and we'll be delivering the shelters and everything to the site, getting it ready. So we will not be passive. We will continue being very aggressive about this so we can get this thing done. We still continue with 5 lease sites, and we're going to start building before the end of this year in those lease sites. And the last thing I want to point out here is that we still have these internal state processes that need to be resolved for the IPTV towers. So the IPTV towers are now the critical path. The towers, if we don't resolve that, we're going to have a problem with being able to close out the project. That's all I have. Any questions?
Delvin, we get a lot of calls about when's my tower going to be ready? When can you turn it on? Well, when you do that, it's called site trunking, correct?
Correct.
So can you explain the ups and downs of that? Because we do have one that's hot, I know, in Waterloo.
Yes, yes.
But you got to be careful with that. So if you could explain site trunking versus when it's all connected to another site.
Sure. So site trunking is a fallback mode, if you will. And the whole idea behind site trunking is that if the site was to become isolated, meaning that it can no longer reach the core, we don't want the radio users to find themselves that they can't communicate with each other. So the whole idea about site trunking is that the site itself allows the users to continue to communicate with each other, but since the site is now disconnected from the core, cannot reach dispatch or can't reach folks that are far away. But if these folks are associated with the same site, they can still talk to each other. So what it does is it basically becomes a wide open site that says, we don't want to put any restrictions. If you're here, stay here, and guys can still communicate. So as we're building these up, and as there's requests for putting the sites into site trunking, it's really more of a demonstration of capabilities and get somewhat familiar with how trunking works and whatnot. If the desire is to use it for operations, then there's risk associated with that because, for example, their dispatches won't be able to reach the site itself unless they have consulates that they use to communicate, right? So that's really all site trunking is. It's just a way to make sure that folks are not out there with dead radio. And that's all it is. Once the sites connect to the core, then the core goes back into implementing the proper permissions and verifying identities and all that kind of stuff. So basically, if you have a radio and you're not programmed into the core, the site will look at the radio will identify itself, the site will talk to the core and say, can this guy be on this site? And the core will say, no, reject them. And site trunking, we don't do that because, again, it's more restrictive. We actually want it to be more open because it represents a failed scenario that we want people to be able to use the site in a failed scenario.
I just want to, when I talk about that, when they call and ask, when the site is in site trunking, as like the Waterloo site, let's just use that as an example. I caution to not use that as a true picture of your coverage.
Correct.
Because that's just one island.
Correct.
When other sites will be pushing RF and joining with that, in the Waterloo case, that site's going to be talking to Bramer, 7 miles away or 8 miles away, which would enhance the coverage in the whole area because of the simulcast. So the point I wanted you to drive home was just because it's in site trunking, if you do give you some radios to test and feel what trunking is like, don't rely on that's the true footprint.
Correct.
Because it will significantly increase when the other sites are all together.
Correct.
So that's the risk you take with letting people try this.
Yes.
With coverage.
And that's sometimes hard to get across because people will listen to you but won't understand it or will forget it. And so if you do provide radios for folks to get acquainted with it, and it's only one site, and perhaps that particular area makes use of 3 sites to provide the coverage, then their experience is going to be less than satisfactory. They're going to say, "Oh, this is not as good as you guys said it was going to be." Right. But if they're all connected to the core, then the core makes sure that all the sites can communicate to each other, and so the operation of the radio system then becomes to the user ubiquitous. Doesn't really matter. One last thing I wanted to mention, actually, it just came to mind now that you said that, is you were talking about roaming. I think you mentioned about roaming. And again, I wanted to encourage you to reach out, particularly Minnesota. I actually worked on expanding the state of Minnesota by adding 3 additional zones to the state. And there were some concerns back then with using different types of radios because even though P25 radios are standardized as the air interface, what's not standardized is the roaming algorithms on the radios. So you can have a radio that will work fine in a site, but doesn't necessarily roam nicely or seamlessly between sites, right? And so, in terms of operations, not everybody understood that, and that's why the state of Minnesota was restrictive at first, because they wanted to make sure that people would get that, and these bugs were being worked out with other vendor radios as well. So just a little bit of insight there. Is that it? Any questions?
Hey.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Jim.
Good morning. Just a couple of quick items to mention today. First, Chair Pavlik mentioned that only a couple of the requested TA deliveries for Iowa were approved. That is a result of our stutter step budget process where we're budgeted for a couple of weeks and we are barred from committing beyond our fiscal ability to deliver right now by congressional appropriations. So hopefully both our TA deliveries and the P25 cap will be infused with funds soon so we can begin that. In the meantime, there is no lack of intent to deliver what's been requested, but we are unable to do so until we actually have a budget. Would also like to reinforce what Swick Myers mentioned about the SAFECOM nationwide survey. OEC uses the information obtained through that survey to conduct what is called the National Baseline Capabilities Assessment, another congressionally mandated product. That informs and drives grants as well as grant guidance to understand where there are gaps and needs. And without that information, it becomes a Fed assessment, and we need state, local, tribal, and territorial input to make sure that the baseline assessment is in fact accurate. OEC is right now working to complete the 2018 SAFECOM grant guidance. The FEMA Grant Program Directorate actually administers the DHS grants, but we're working directly with GPD to change some of the language as it talks about requirements in future grants to ensure compatibility with things such as P25 architecture, interoperable encryption, and things along that line to ensure that we don't end up with an unintended gap. The last thing I reported to the 911 Council, OEC is beginning a project with a selected number of states, I believe it is 5, to implement one of the FCC's items from the Task Force on Optimal PSAP Architecture. Big mouthful, but basically what we're trying to identify is how do we implement an emergency communications cybersecurity center, or an EC3 process that informs not only the next-gen 911 and 911 community, but integrate cybersecurity awareness with federal and other partners so that this works seamlessly and smoothly. The EC3 will involve the DHS, National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, the NCIC, the FCC, and the FBI, as well as our Fusion Center partners, to try to be sure that we have an effective real-time communications architecture. One of the Region 7 states has volunteered to be a participant in that, and we hope to have outcome of that solidified so we'll actually have something in production and workable by 2020 timeframe. The EC3 is a big lift and it requires a lot of intergovernmental cooperation. So first steps where we are right now. Any questions for me? Thank you.
Okay, moving on to old business. I don't believe Terry's here. Would you give an update, just what we're going to do today, the reminder at 1:30? Sure.
At 1:30 today, the Standards Working Group's going to be putting on a Standards Isicsb workshop where we have about 12 to 13 individuals from different committees going to get together to go over 15 different standards and get their input, make the edits in real time. I'm going to be sitting up at the computer making the edits. So the hope is to get through at least, I'm going to say like 6 to 7 today, and then get those pushed off to governance and hopefully approved next in January. So that's going to be going on today at the DPS headquarters at 1:30 after this meeting. So.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to new business. Chair Buffington, we have a couple applications to approve. And I will be taking a roll call on these because we do have a lot on the phone today, if you don't mind. Ethan, I might have to have you do that for me.
You want to do them individually or?
I think we could probably do them both, but
Yes.
just take a roll call.
Agreed. All right. The user group committee has reviewed the Lynn County Sheriff's Office as well as the Carlisle Fire Department's applications for access to the Iowa statewide communication system and recommend approval from the full board. So as chair of the UGC, I would make a motion to approve the Lynn County Sheriff's Office and the Carlisle Fire Department.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor to approve Lynn County Sheriff's Office and Carlisle Fire with access to the Isicsb system by Chair Buffington. Do I have a second?
Ness.
David Ness is a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, take a roll call, please.
All right. Jeff Swearingen. Patrick Updike.
Aye. Aye.
Jeff Sunholm.
Aye.
Marty Smith. Tom Lampy.
Aye.
John Benson.
Aye.
Bob Van Wolfrat. Denise Pavlik.
Aye.
Andy Buffington.
Aye.
Ellen Hagan. Deb Cribble.
Aye.
Dave Ness.
Aye.
Jason Leonard.
Aye.
Rob Rotter.
Aye.
Mike Casper.
I will abstain.
Carol Lund Smith.
Aye.
Larry Smith.
Aye.
Linda Frederickson.
Aye.
Kelly Grosskirth.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Amended version of the Isicsb MOA. Back to you, John.
Thank you. I believe the amended version of the MOA was included in the packet that came out in advance of the meeting. I would accordingly make a motion that the board approve the amended memorandum of agreement.
Okay, motion by Chair Benson to approve the amended MOA. Do I have a second? Second. Second, Jason Leonard. Probably should have told you just stay there.
No worries. All right. Jeff Swearingen. Patrick Updike.
Aye.
Jeff Sunholm.
Aye.
Marty Smith. Tom Lampy.
Aye.
John Benson.
Aye.
Bob Van Wolfrat. Denise Pavlik.
Aye.
Andy Buffington.
Aye.
Ellen Hagan. Deb Cribble.
Aye.
Dave Ness.
Aye.
Jason Leonard.
Aye.
Rob Rotter.
Aye.
Mike Casper.
Aye.
Carol Lund Smith.
Aye.
Larry Smith.
Aye.
Lindra Frederickson.
Aye.
Kelly Grosskirth.
Aye.
Pass.
Okay. Motion passes. Thank you. We are now on to public comment. If anybody would like to approach the podium and address the board, you're welcome to do that at this time. Okay. Motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Jeff Sunholm, a second? Second, we're adjourned. Thank you.